Okay, welcome back everybody to continuing this session. The paper from Helga Hannesdóttir from Gothenburg, asking what looks to me like a really interesting question. I'm looking forward to hearing the answer, so over to you.
Thank you very much, and this is going to be about bilingual lexicography. And what is the target language in an electronic dictionary? Well, the obvious answer to this question is, of course, it's the language that is not the source language. And in many cases, that is the correct answer as well. But in a bilingual online dictionary with multiple access to all the lexicographic content in the database, the answer is not that simple. And it is the target language in one such dictionary that is the basis for what I'm going to talk about here today. The dictionary in question is the multilingual online resource, eLex. I will focus on the Icelandic-Swedish constellation and primarily the vocabulary of the Swedish language as it appears in this resource. I will view the Swedish language from the perspective of the user utilizing the options offered by the multiple access to all the content in the dictionary. And I will also adopt the perspective of the lexicographer. And finally, I will address some of the theoretical and methodological challenges to the bilingual lexicography that the multiple search options lead to. But I will begin with a brief presentation of the eLex project and the online resources or dictionaries it resulted in. The project was initiated in 2005, and that's ages ago compared to the keynote speech this morning, which was launched or initiated in 2011, and this was in a different age of lexicography, in a way. The work started in 2006, and it was launched on the internet in 2011. The editing work was initially carried out in 4 of the Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Iceland. The database was developed in Iceland, and the Icelanders are still in charge of the maintenance and development of the database. And all the editorial work on the Icelandic language was done in Iceland. The Danish content was edited in Denmark, and the Norwegian in Norway, and the Swedish language in Sweden. Later on, also the Faroe Islands and Finland joined in with the project. The eLex project was almost entirely funded by the governments and by public funds, and the dictionaries are consequently accessible free of charge on the internet. The objective of eLex is to serve as many users in as many linguistics and lexicographic functions and activities as possible, which means decoding text in the foreign language, and the foreign language being Icelandic, as well as any one of the other languages, and also in encoding text in a foreign language. And it's also meant to serve learners and translators as well. The eLex online dictionaries are extracted from one database housing 5 languages. Icelandic lemmas, there are 50,000 of them, and Danish, Faroese, Norwegian, both varieties of Norwegian, and Swedish equivalents, explanations, and translations, and this is published in 5 different bilingual dictionaries. Icelandic Danish, Icelandic Faroese, Icelandic B-Norwegian, and New Norwegian, both varieties there, and Icelandic Swedish. Icelandic Finnish is still in progress. The eLex resource is, however, not meant to be a bilingual dictionary between any other constellation of the 2 languages. That is not a Danish-Swedish dictionary. Icelandic is the point of departure for the lexicographic description of the other languages. The subset of the Icelandic lexicon presented in eLex is carefully selected, and the description of the semantics, syntactic, pragmatic, and the other features of each lexical unit is carefully planned and painstaking. The representation of each of the other languages, Danish, Faroese, Norwegian, and Swedish, is subordinate to and reactive to the Icelandic lexical unit. Those languages are represented by units called for by the Icelandic lemmas, and the description of the specific features of these units is provided only when it's relevant in relation to the Icelandic material. The around 50,000 Icelandic lemmas are selected with respect to adequacy and representativity in relation to the Icelandic lexicon and to the manifold objectives of the dictionary. The emphasis lies on the modern Icelandic lexicon and the Icelandic society of today, as it is reflected in the lexicon. Also, some words central in the medieval Icelandic sagas are included, as well as some culture-specific words and words denoting Icelandic folklore, the Icelandic landscape with volcanoes and lava fields and glaciers, but albeit being far from complete coverage of the Icelandic lexicon. Systematic and unintentional lemma lacunas are not to be expected in eLex. The Swedish vocabulary is, unlike the Icelandic one, not the result of a carefully conducted and well-conceived selection process. While there are 50,000 Icelandic lemmas in eLex, the number of unique Swedish equivalents reaches around 41,000 units. As can be expected, this vocabulary of 41,000 words constitutes a somewhat arbitrary subset of the Swedish lexicon, and the degree of representativity in terms of basic words among these 41,000 words is somewhat insufficient compared to the representativity of the Icelandic lemmas. Thus, the coverage of the Swedish lexicon is defective in some remarkable ways. And we can actually speak about systematic lacunas in the Swedish vocabulary presented, that is, equivalent lacunas. The limited coverage of the lexicon is, of course, a disadvantage for the users, the Icelander using eLex when decoding a Swedish text, and also for the Swede using eLex when producing text in Icelandic, expressing himself in Icelandic. One lexical subset of the Swedish lexicon that is poorly represented in eLex consists of verbs derived from Greco-Romance stems through the Swedish derivational suffix era and its variants, or some variants of that. As a comparison, the printed Swedish Icelandic dictionary from the 80s, consisting of 60,000 lemmas, includes a good 1,000 such verbs as lemmas, while only around 500 such verbs occur in the, however, somewhat smaller eLex dictionary, but not that much smaller. From the Icelandic user's point of view, the Swedish era verbs are tricky. In spite of being common in many Germanic and Romance languages and being part of the international vocabulary, many of these words are not in any way incorporated in Icelandic, not even the stems or as participles or anything, nouns. And most of these verbs denote a rather abstract processes, like associera and stratifiera, associate and stratify. And many of them are of frequent occurrence in the colloquial Swedish of today, and formal, of course, informal text as well. In Icelandic, the meaning of such verbs is often lexicalized in form of multi-word units and phrases, and not included in the Icelandic vocabulary, not established enough to be included in or looked upon as parts of the central lexicon of Icelandic. And the absence of the Swedish units is a rather serious shortage in the Swedish vocabulary presented in eLex. And there is no match for the verbs, you see them like acclimatisera and associera, devalvera, etc. Quite abstract and common verbs, many more of them. Another lexical subset of the Swedish lexicon that is sparsely represented in eLex consists of words denoting culture-specific Swedish phenomena and words denoting some traditional or typical Swedish ways of farming, and words on forestry and mining, activities that are not actually carried out in Iceland. A representative selection of such central culture-specific words of frequent occurrence should be included in a resource like eLex. Anyway, for phenomena not lexicalized in Icelandic and thus not represented by Icelandic units in eLex, there is no incentive for providing the Swedish word for those phenomena, however motivated it actually is. The access to the content of the database offered to the users is rather generous. Set in the default search mode, the query concerns lemmas and also equivalents in one particular language. And there is an advanced search mode too, concerning also a free text search of single or multi-word units or strings occurring in the entire eLex resource. That is in the many collocations, idioms and examples of usage included in the articles and the translations of these collocations, etc. The advanced search mode allows for a simultaneous search in all the languages presented in eLex. Here we see a search for the query of the string hund, which is a word equivalent in Danish and also found in Norwegian and both varieties and in Swedish. And also it's a word form in Icelandic. It gets that one too. Word form hund, that's hundur, a form of hundur, oblique form. And it's also found in like 100 examples or collocations or whatever, the string hund. I didn't make the search for just the word. So you see hundur in the first one. But there are hundreds of matches in the total database, in the complete database. And if we open the article, we find two meanings of the lemma. Hundur, the Icelandic lemma, that's where we get. One denoting the animal, and another one is an abusive term for a person. From the user's point of view, any one of the languages in question, Icelandic as well as Danish, Swedish and the others, can therefore function as a target language. Icelandic as well as those meant to be target language in the traditional lexicography. In contrast to the language that is the point of departure for the search language, we have target language and search language, it's not relevant anymore. Thus, the users asking why they don't find common Swedish words in the eLex dictionary, they do have a point. This goes for Icelandic speakers looking up a Swedish word to find out what it means, as well as the Swedes looking for a way of expressing the meaning of a Swedish word in Icelandic. Persisting the lexicographic relevance of the distinction between source language and target language is probably not taken for an answer to as the user. This distinction is neutralized by the multiple search options offered. One theoretical consequence of the multiple search options is that the established notion of source language and target language should be reconsidered. Thus, they should be distinguished with respect to the lexicographic perspective on the one hand and the user perspective on the other. In the eLex case, the lexicographic status of Icelandic is that of a main language or dominating language, since it makes the basis of the lexicographic description also of the other languages now included, and probably every other language to be added to the eLex database. The lexicographic status of these languages is therefore subordinate to Icelandic. Do you hear me? Is that what you are beeping? You don't? No, okay. The user perspective, on the other hand, is a matter of accessibility. To emphasize the distinction between the lexicographic perspective and the user perspective, the terms source language and target language should be relinquished and modified with respect to the perspective in question. In the written version of this paper, I use the terms main language and subordinate language when referring to the lexicographic perspective, and source language and target language referring to the user perspective. These terms might not be perfect, and other terms have been suggested. My point is that the two perspectives should be separated and kept apart. With the wisdom of hindsight, it's easy to see what could have been done differently with respect to the Swedish part of eLex. We were not aware of what impact the multiple accessibility would have on the dictionaries. Actually, the question of access to the data and presentation alternatives was not at stake in the project until quite late in the editing process. The lexical description of the material in eLex is strongly based on the theory of a dichotomous relationship between the two languages included in a bilingual dictionary, one being the source language and the other one the target language. This distinction is, however, rooted in a monodirectionality and the accessibility being restricted to one of the languages, conditions that are outdated in the online dictionary. One methodological challenge for the bilingual online lexicography is to develop models for an adequate description of the language subordinate to the main language. This description should not be restricted to features triggered by characteristics of the main language without, however, outright being conceived as a monolingual description. I don't believe in two monolingual descriptions matched together. It should rather focus on the contrastive perspective, highlighting language-specific features with respect not only to semantics but also regarding syntagmatic characteristics such as selectional restrictions and valency patterns, of course. This should mean a delicate balance between a monolingual, language-specific and a strict bilingual contrastive perspective. At last, a technical challenge is to allow for flexible description of the subordinate language in relation to the main language. The eLex database and the editorial interface have indeed proved well adapted to its purpose. Every editor of a subordinate language can add information relevant to the relationship between Icelandic and that specific language. The database and the editorial interface also allow for flexible solutions with respect to supplementation of the vocabulary of the subordinate language. What has become obvious reviewing the process of editing eLex as well as the resulting product itself is that the theories and methods of bilingual lexicography do not keep up with the options offered to the lexicographers as well as to the users by the development in computer science and corpus linguistics. The lexicographers working on bilingual dictionaries must loosen their grip on several traditional notions established ages ago. In particular, the lexical description of the languages should be based on the multiple accessibility at hand in the online dictionaries, rather than on the restricted accessibility in the printed dictionaries. Much more information is available in online dictionaries, and the creative user looks up whatever we generously make accessible. And we must take the consequences of our generosity by furnishing the lexicographic material provided with as much relevant information as possible, whether the user is a speaker of the main language or the subordinate language, and whatever he wants to use the dictionary for. The computer technology and the corpus linguistics can probably provide us with whatever we need. And as pointed out this morning in the keynote speech, this morning, it's up to us lexicographers to find out what to ask for. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Anna. And do we have a few moments for some questions before the next session? Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, Lada. Do you need
Thank you for a very interesting presentation, but I think it's a bit pity that it doesn't include English as one of the languages. Because for me, as a non-speaker of any of those languages, it's of little use, yes?
Yes, I'm sorry about that. Yes, it's completely useless to everybody who doesn't speak one of those languages, of course. This project is an academic project. This is no publishing house, or it's just the academic institutions that have been working on this. So, and English is not an option because of concurrence. What do you call it? Competition reasons with the free market. The English dictionaries, the Swedish English and English Swedish, Icelandic English Icelandic are the only dictionary that sell on the market, and so we cannot include English, unfortunately.
Thank you for a very interesting paper. I was wondering whether you know anything about the use of the eLex lexicographical database, because it would be very interesting to see what sort of feedback this resource has had.
Yes, we do know something about what the users think, and they are, well, the dominating impression we get from the users and the response from the reactions from the users are very, very positive. But that's, and we have made an user survey, but I cannot go into that here now. But I think maybe it's because of the lack of resources. This is the only one, and they really appreciate it. But we do also get suggestions for words missing or meanings lacking or equivalents not being the right ones or yeah. So we do get a lot of response. And unfortunately we can adjust the mistakes, we can correct the mistakes, and we can add equivalents that we didn't get there in the first place. And that's terrific.
Yeah, just one addition to that about the users. I think it's right to say that the majority of users are Icelanders, not Scandinavians. There are more people in Iceland interested in Scandinavian language than vice versa. And if you go back to the conceptualization of the dictionary, the use for non-native speakers of Icelandic was important when the project started. But you cannot control who are using the dictionary. But still, I think it's important to have a concept, a dictionary concept, and you're sort of being critical of the concept that Icelandic is the source language and the Scandinavian are the target language, just because we chose to give the option of searching the other fields because they were available.
Yeah.
Does it mean that the whole concept is going to be revised because they're not used according to the way it was conceptualized? I mean, that's a general question. If you have a database, should you allow everything to be searched? Or is it okay to devise, this is used for a particular purpose and a particular user group? That is the, even if you don't know the Scandinavian language, this is the general question that you're asking, really.
Yeah. Yes, I'm aware of that. And I think that when so much money has been invested in a resource like this, we have to use it. And when we can, we made it available for more, for a wider usage than when it was meant, conceptualized for in the beginning. And we do have ways of adding equivalents and adding examples and thus adding translations to our own. I can insert an Icelandic example and translate it into Swedish and then get this stratify verb. And then it's searchable. So we have to, well, we must take the consequences of making those things available. And we must make them available. We can't let all this money, taxpayers' money, be usable only for the Icelanders studying Danish, compulsory Danish in school. I need the Swedish. I need my Swedish students studying Icelandic. They must need it, and they ask me, why don't we find those words? Why or not? So, well.
Anyway, I think at that point we need to move on to the next paper. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you.